Today we're going to be discussing creating video game music. Hi folks, I'm Mike and I hope you're well. So today we're going to be discussing the incredibly interesting subject of creating video game music. But before we get into that, if this is your first time here and you like this kind of content, all about music creation, DAWs, plugins, music gear, that kind of thing, then please do subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube so that you get to see my future videos. Now, video game music creation. This is a beginner's guide with a bit of a difference. I'm the beginner. Now, before you cry foul and say it was a misleading title, well, you're kind of right, but I have been composing music for some decades, so hopefully I've learned a thing or two and you can learn a little from that experience as I embark on this new process. So you are going to be hearing a new composition which I started writing about 5 days ago when I started planning this video. So it's a new composition, doesn't even have a name, so please do put some name suggestions in the comments and I will pick a winner and give you a shout out in the next video, and that piece of music shall forever have the name that you bestowed upon it. So please do take part and do that in the comments. So video game music creation, what's so special about it? So a lot of you may think, like I did, well, it's just like movie music, isn't it? It's just the same kind of thing. There's often not vocals, it's very moody and sort of supports the storyline. All true, but there are some massive differences. In a movie, the director and the musical director know what's going to happen. They know the events that are going to take place and when they're going to take place. In a game, the player is controlling when those events take place, and it could be really unpredictable. So the music needs to transition at times when the player takes an action or there's an event in the game. And music game creators use a number of tools to do that. They may use bridging pieces to join two pieces of music together, or they may actually export the stems from their DAW instead of the stereo mix, and within the game they add and take away layers depending on what's happening in the game, and all kinds of other techniques. So we need to keep this in mind when we're composing. What I wanted to do was take a game, think about the moods in the game and come up with 2, 3 or 4 themes and blend them one to the other to kind of practice that process. So I've done that for you to take a look, and then I'm going to be talking through the process of how I actually put together the whole piece of music. It should be an interesting watch and hopefully you'll learn something from it. But I started off by choosing a game and playing it. So the game I chose was The Witcher 3, came out in about 2015, so an oldish game now, but I hadn't really played it much before, so I gave it a good play, not the worst job in the world, with the original music turned off so that I wouldn't be influenced by it, and I recorded the screen so that I'd look back at the footage later and kind of get a feel for the different moods that I wanted created. So that's where I started, and then I just jumped straight into my DAW and started writing. So without further ado, let's listen to the complete piece of music, and I'm going to put the video footage of some of the gameplay with it so you can get an idea of what I was trying to achieve. It lasts about 2 minutes, so sit tight, have a listen, and also try and come up with that name. Here goes. So here I am in Studio One, my DAW of choice, but you can use any DAW. And I started off this whole thing with just a simple violin motif. A motif is a simple piece of music which gets repeated throughout a piece of music as a kind of a theme, if you like, and you can build upon them. And my little motif went like this. Very, very simple. So I then added in another violin, or not a violin, but a sort of cello or deep string section to harmonize with that. It goes like this. And then just added another section of violins, but this time with much more sustained notes to drag out some of those notes in the middle of the piece to create another kind of a tension. So that really sort of defined the core of my piece. I then copied and pasted all of that over to add a repeat and just threw in a harmony on the sustained violin and a bass part. Very simple root note bass. And it sounds like this. So nothing in itself is complex, but the combination of all these things together starts to add layers. And these are things that you could repeat and remove or add layers if you wish. So that was basically the string section, and that was used in the second half where the big rock section is as well, and copied and pasted over. The next thing I wanted to do was add some French horns because I think they just sound really great as a kind of a battle cry kind of a thing. And the sound I used went like this. So nothing really complex. I added in a harmony, so I had two French horns going there. So again, they're just a kind of a drone underneath the strings. And then I added in a third French horn part on the repeat, but this one introduced a new motif which gets used again later by the electric guitars towards the end. So let's have a listen to that motif. So all of that adds together with the strings and the horns to sound something like this. So really nothing complex at all, just very simple pieces put it together. You've got to think in terms of, you know, harmony and counterpoint, that kind of thing when you're putting this together. But harmony is your friend. You don't want too much of the same note most of the time. The next thing I wanted to do was create some impact kind of when a bad guy might appear. So the idea here is at any point in the game, suddenly the bad guy appears. And for that, I wanted to have these very deep hits. And I used one of my favorite plugins, which is called Heaviosity. And I really like some of the sounds on that. And that simply sounds like this. Nice and big. I added in another hit underneath, sounds like this. Just to add like a massive echo to the whole thing. I also added a cymbal and introduced the bass guitar, a detuned bass guitar, so you get a really deep note to it. Sounds like this. And to add even more to it, I had another deep string playing and a very deep piano note, dong, and a big long low brass drone. Now I sort of broke my rule here, there's no harmony, it's all just a root note, and it's designed for a deep impact. I didn't want too much high in there. So at that point, I knew that I wanted to introduce another theme which could be repeated by the electric guitars later, and that is the glockenspiel. Very, very repetitive piece. I played this at last, sort of 8 bars or 4 bars. I just copied and pasted it through the rest of the piece, and that is sort of interesting because I think a glockenspiel normally is sort of a fairly pretty instrument, but in this case it tends to sound a little bit sort of spooky or sinister. It sounds like this. So this is the bad guy arriving, and this is how this sort of little interlude was used, and it was also used as a way to join to the next piece, which is where the sort of journey in the game really gets going. Now, I hadn't originally intended it, but I eventually came to the conclusion that I wanted to come in big, almost like a stadium rock band kind of feel. I started off with the drums, which make heavy use of the tom-toms, sounding like this. And then in the mix, I added heaps and heaps of reverb on the snare drums. Let's have a listen to that. Just well over the top, crazy stuff. Not a sound I would normally use these days. It's sort of very 80s rock to do that. But in this case, I wanted high drama. So I used that. Also had my deep hits in there with that as well, and my bass guitar. But of course, the most noticeable thing was the electric guitars which come in. And they're interesting, the electric guitars. If you haven't recorded them before, this is a technique which is well known, and that's to take one guitar part, record it twice, and then pan one very hard left and the other one very hard right. And because you don't play it exactly the same each time, it creates a really spacious kind of wide sound, and they sounded like this. So then with the bass and drums and the other hits in there. So nothing special at all. I was just using guitar rig with a sort of fairly basic sort of overdrive sound. Now, I wanted these electric guitars to come in, lead guitars, and sort of play some of the previous motifs from the more sort of classical part. And I must admit, I've probably been influenced recently a lot by watching loads of stuff about Queen and reliving my youth listening to them. And I went for this sort of typical sort of Brian May approach on their recordings, which was to layer a few lead guitar parts together. Also, I used to listen to like Thin Lizzy a lot when I was younger, and they had a habit of doing this in some of their songs, and I used to like the way they harmonized their lead guitars. So that was my aim there. So the main lead guitar comes in and plays the motif which was introduced originally by the French horns at the beginning. Sounds like this. And then he gets harmonized. And then in this last part of the lead guitars, that lead guitar takes on the third motif, which was introduced by the glockenspiel, and plays that melody line and sounds like this. Probably slightly out of tune now I hear it. And I also had added a third lead guitar in there, which just harmonized that little motif. And notice the sudden ending there, and that is so this little sinister glockenspiel can finish off. Now, all of that section there, which is kind of like a rock band section, was also accompanied by the original strings and the horns. I used a slightly different sound on the horns this time because I wanted them to blast a bit more, so they sound like this. Just a lot more velocity creating that sound. So then you get an overall sound for the ending piece, which sounds like this. I'll go to the second section. So folks, I hope you found this guide useful. Now, if you've created some video game music, and I know some of you have, then do add some links and talk about it in the comments below. Shamelessly promote yourself, guys. I don't mind one bit. If you'd like to see some more of my content and you haven't already subscribed, then please do, and ring the bell on YouTube so that you can see my future comment. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you dislike this video, then hit the dislike button twice. And I will see you all in the next video.